Hey guys, it's Courtney here from flynnknit. Today I just wanted to share with you a couple of tips about Fair Isle knitting. Specifically, I'll talk a little bit about floats and then move on to yarn positioning. So when we're talking about floats, we're talking about those horizontal lines that are kind of formed in the inside of our work when you're working in the round. And those lines are formed because you are carrying your yarn across multiple stitches when you're changing colors. So for example, I have an orange stitch right here, and then I have two gray stitches, and then I have another orange stitch. So this float right here is created because I'm carrying that yarn between those two orange stitches. And what you want to make sure of when you're doing this type of knitting is just to make sure that those stitches, those floats, are not too tight. So if you're able to give it a gentle tug and it stretches, that's what you're looking for. If it's too tight and you're not able to stretch it easily, your whole project will or can turn out too narrow, or there can be some puckering in the fabric. And so just to make sure that as you're going along, just make sure that those floats are able to stretch and have some flexibility there, and then you'll know you're on the right track as you move through your project. All right, so next I'm going to tell you a little bit about yarn positioning. Okay, so yarn position and consistency in yarn position is important in Fair Isle knitting, just to make sure those floats stay nice and tidy and have that flexibility to stretch like we just talked about. So there are many ways to do this, and this is just my way I wanted to share with you. I know some people are able to hold their yarn in one hand and maintain consistency with position, and others may do a combination of continental and English style and hold the yarn in two hands. This is just the way I do it. And the way I do it is I basically choose one yarn and designate it as my top yarn, as it were, and the other yarn as the bottom yarn in the bottom position. And the reason I'm calling it that is because this orange yarn, or my top yarn, is over on top of that gray yarn. Okay, and then the gray yarn is in the bottom position. And to keep it straight as I'm knitting, I just keep the top yarn over to the right of me and the bottom yarn over to the left of me. Okay, and I'll show you a little bit better how this works as I knit a few stitches here. So I'm up to my gray stitches, which is my bottom yarn. So I'm kind of moving that yarn in the top position over kind of on top of my needle and keeping it to the right. And then I'll grab my gray yarn, the bottom yarn, and knit it as I normally would, but it's coming, kind of staying in that bottom position. So I'll knit those 3 stitches. Then I come to my orange stitches, and so I'm going to move that gray back over to the left, stay right where it is. I'm going to pick up the orange yarn. And I'll knit those 3 stitches. And when I come up to knit those 3 stitches, that yarn is coming up over that gray yarn. Okay, so it's staying in the same position as it was. Knit those 3 orange stitches. And then you can see when I reach this point that that orange yarn remains in the top position and the gray yarn remains in the bottom position. Okay, and so you can choose whichever way that works best for you, or designate whichever yarn you want to as that top and bottom yarn, but that's just the way that works best for me. And as you do that, I keep it straight again by keeping the yarn in 2 separate places so they don't get tangled. If you do tangle your yarn, what'll happen is those floats won't have as much room to stretch. So as long as you keep those yarns separated, it should make sure that you have the flexibility in those floats to stretch, all right? And so just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I have a finished hat, and this is, I turned it inside out so you can see. So those floats are all nice and tidy. They've got room to stretch. And this is what your work should look like if you're able to keep those yarn positions the same and consistent throughout your work. It won't look exactly like this pattern, but it'll hopefully be nice and tidy and have that stretchy fabric that you're looking for. So I hope you found this helpful, and thanks so much for watching. Follow me on Instagram at flynnknit to see what I'm working on next.